If mankind wants to survive on this earth, we absolutely need to utilize the zero-point energy of the quantum vacuum. The reason why we absolutely need to utilize the zero-point energy of the quantum vacuum, also named free energy, can be understood best when we become aware of what catastrophes are going to happen if we continue to reject the use of free energy, as we have done up to now. It can be put in a nutshell with very few words. Dying is easier than rethinking. This is how a colleague, a retired professor of psychology at a German university, described it succinctly and concisely. Huh? I reacted in surprise, but he immediately countered with examples. Already the first example of this kind speaks for itself: the colonization of Greenland by the Vikings. It is a tragic story, authentically narrated from historical sources, that shows how mortal civilizations are. Above all, this story shows that people are standing in the way of themselves without realizing it. Because the dogmas are so strong in the minds and so firmly anchored that people are more likely to die than to give up their dogmas. It is simply too difficult to get rid of one's own dogmas. In earlier centuries, the Vikings inhabited not only the area of present-day Denmark, but they also had a colony in Greenland. Around 875, the Norwegian Gunnbjörn discovered the island. This green island was visited by Eric the Red in the year 982 due to a banishment, and soon after this visit he settled with emigrants. This is reported in the Greenland Saga. There are remains of old stone walls of the settlement Bratild, where today lies an Inuit settlement with the name Kvasiarsuk. In the heyday, there was even a bishop of Greenland who was in contact with the Pope in Rome. For about 300 years there were widespread settlements with about 3,000 inhabitants. The island of Greenland is told to have been a few degrees warmer than it is today. The people there called themselves Grönländinger, grew crops and grains, lived on cattle breeding, and even went on expeditions to North America. Of course, they were in contact with their relatives in the region of today's Denmark. They used European lifestyle. About the end of the Viking settlement, Wikipedia writes, by 1550 at latest, the last Nordic settlement in Greenland went out. Recent genetic studies, both on today's Inuit and on archaeological remnants of the Grönlandinger, seem to exclude a mixture of the two groups. This means that the Grönlandinger are probably extinct. I beg your pardon. The present slide lecture contains several quotations which are not taken literally from the English texts, but they are self-made translations from the German texts. This practice is applied for several quotations, also for those of Wikipedia. Also, the reason for the end of the Viking colony in Greenland can be read in Wikipedia. Let me summarize it briefly. About half a millennium later, this is about 500 years after the discovery of Greenland by the Vikings, a climate crash occurred, namely a cooling of the average temperature of about 4 degrees Celsius. Thus the winters became harder, the summers shorter, and the crops leaner, so that finally the breeding animals in the stables and on the meadowlands starved to death. What we call today the Little Ice Age had the consequence that not only breeding animals, but also humans were starving to death. Two dogmas of the Vikings came together, which added to a fatal end of the Viking civilization on Greenland. On the one hand, the bishop of Greenland had always made sure that the Vikings did not mix genetically with Inuit, which today can be considered genetically verified, and secondly, that they did not adopt the Inuit lifestyle, but that they kept their own European life habits. The Inuit, who came across the Bering Strait from Alaska to Greenland, around since 3000 before Christ, did not have any problems with the climate change at their homeland, Greenland. Remains of hunting grounds that existed from 2500 before Christ up to now are well known. If the Vikings would have looked at how the neighbors live, then a small change of the menu would have been enough to survive as well. Seal meat instead of pork, that would have been the solution. It is to be hoped that in a few centuries a later civilization will not look back to us and say zero-point energy instead of nuclear energy, oil and gas. That would have been the way to survive. There are many examples of past civilizations, from the Mayas to the creator of the ancient Indian Vedas. The second example of a past civilization the colleague told me about was Rapa Nui, the Easter island at the southeast Pacific. They are located south of the Tropic of Capricorn and today belong politically to Chile. The capital Hangaroa is 3,526 kilometers from the Chilean coast and 4,251 kilometers from Tahiti. The nearest neighbors live on the island of Pitcairn, 2,078 kilometers to the west, geographically belonging to Polynesia. The settlement history is not completely clear. According to a legend of Hotua Matua, which is confirmed by archaeological, genealogical and linguistic findings, we have to assume a settlement from Polynesia. This is from the west. In a first wave in the 5th or 6th century, and in a second settlement wave in the 14th century. The decisive problem Wikipedia describes with the words: from about 1100 after Christ, the construction of large-scale structures began, the so-called platforms of ceremony, called ahu, the stone statues, called moai, of cisterns and observation towers, the so-called turtle towers. This period of cultural prosperity lasted until the middle of the 17th century. During the heyday, monumental structures were created, such as the moais at Ahu Tongariki, which are part of the Rapa Nui National Park, which has been recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1995 in the region of Asia and Oceania. Hundreds of statues were created, usually several meters high, for example 5 or 6 meters in size, whose material, the stone blocks, had to be transported over many kilometers. With the Rongo script, there has even been its own written form, a sign of the enormously high culture on that little island. Nearly 1 century after the decline of culture there, namely in the 18th century, exactly in 1722, the Easter Island was discovered by Europeans. It offered a sad picture. What had happened? An image of what we humans do today with our entire Earth. The inhabitants of Rapa Nui had destroyed themselves and their own existence. Again, I summarize briefly with the words of Wikipedia. Up to the end of the 13th century, the soil had been gently cultivated. But from about 1300 after Christ, a radical deforestation started with increasing soil erosion. This led to the abandonment of settlements. From this time on, the interior of the island was increasingly populated without access to the important food source from the ocean. After 1425, a highly intensive farming was applied using innovative technologies. From about 1500 on, increasingly tribal warfare occurred, using novel weapon systems, short spears. The warrior caste gains in influence. This is the typical image of a cultural decline as we observe it in our civilization today. As can be seen from archaeological, biological investigations of waste piles of the settlements, The number of species of seabirds decreases rapidly after 1650 as a source of food. From the middle of the 17th century, the construction of monumental sculptures comes to a standstill. From the end of the 17th century, at the latest in the first half of the 18th century, the cultural platforms had been systematically destroyed by the islanders themselves, and the statues had been overturned. There is a complete decline of the traditional culture based on ancestor worship. It is highly controversial where the roots of this cultural decline are to be found. However, the majority of researchers now believe that the problems had been caused by the islanders themselves. Very popular was the thesis by Jared Diamond, assuming the exploitation of the natural resources which had led to the destruction of the ecological balance on the isolated island. Here's the end of quotation as far as the words from Wikipedia's in translation. Even famine and religious wars as the cause of disintegration and decay are discussed, as it typically results from the misuse of resources. So what had happened? The people on Rapa Nui had begun to cut down the forests in order to gain as much food as possible and to erect as many statues as possible. This is a behavior that follows a rigid dogma which cannot be abandoned even when the destruction of one's own society and habitat is obvious. It would have been recommendable to rethink, but the narrowness of the individual human brains made such a reorganization impossible. Only when the forests had been cut down almost completely, the society together with its dogma break up. We will have to make some effort to choose the right path for our society, not to death, but to life. The people of the Cree Indians have shaped the prophecy, which fits here in a not quite exact but meaningful modification. Only when the last tree has been cut down, the last river poisoned, and the last fish is caught, you will realize that one cannot eat money. The wisdom of the Cree. I wish we could learn about it before it's too late for us. All human beings make mistakes. Errors are normal for us humans. The stupid ones repeat always the same mistakes again and again. Smart and intelligent people, however, avoid known mistakes, but then sometimes fall into new sources of error. Since we as humanity have learned on several occasions that dogmatic narrowness of the minds and lack of flexibility of brains lead into collective death, we should now learn to think better and not to listen to our old dogmas that ignore the exploration of genuine, clean and sustainable alternatives. Numerous other examples of sunken civilizations and cultures are told by history. The Maya, the ancient Hindu culture, the Babylonian, the Sumerian, and many more. Many of them have fallen into oblivion so much that today historians cannot even remember their names or do not want to remember them. How close our own culture is to downfall is demonstrated by a recent scientific study by NASA, published in 2014 in a prestigious journal. The study is based on profound university mathematics and concludes that a collapse of our civilization is inevitable. NASA researchers have compared various models of our planet and civilization far beyond the usual levels of worst-case, mid-case and best-case scenarios, but all of these scenarios and computer simulations lead to the total destruction of our planet civilization. It is only a matter of time before the death of our society, as we know it today, occurs. The different models differ only by a few years, so it can be said that just about all viewers watching this present video here will be part of what we commonly call the end of our world. The Apocalypse. The chief explorer Safa Motishari, whose work was funded by NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, even answers the question of why our civilization will perish. The key question of his research is which factors are causing great civilizations to fall. With his statements, Dr. Montecharey is far away from being alone on the floor. Even Stephen Hawking warns against the self-extermination of humanity. And this is also well known because we even can read it in the widespread standard journals and newspapers such as Zeit, as for instance in the issue of January 19th, 2010. Without citing conspiracy theories, we have to face the fact that humanity is aware of the impending decline, and yet, with all eyes and with full will, runs into its own death. If nevertheless there is no change in our course, the only elementary logical consequence remains. Those who are in charge want the death of many people and the end of our civilization, as we know it today. If it were otherwise, then there would be a course change in the current steering of our planet. According to the NASA study, the reason for the imminent decline of our civilization is the mismatch between robbers and prey. Needless to say that both are humans. Now, of course, we face the question, is there any help? So to say it banally, is there still a chance to save our planet Earth and to save mankind? In my opinion, the answer is a clear yes, but therefore we need technologies that allow such a rescue. Other technologies than those ones we use today. We currently have many such positive technologies, but they are not used. I will come to this topic in a few minutes. Of course, when I talk about technologies, we always think of their inventors and developers, such as engineers and scientists. About this species, Max Planck said a very desperate sentence. A new scientific truth does not prevail in such a way that its opponents are convinced and taught, but rather by the fact that their opponents die out in the course of time and that the adolescent generation is acquainted with the truth from the very beginning. So far, Max Planck. In those days of his time, when he developed quantum mechanics, and therefore was first opposed and defeated, as everybody experiences who develops something really new, he could still allow this frustrating logic because mankind had enough time to wait until the old generation of scientists who wanted to block progress, as every generation of scientists, had simply died out. Unfortunately, the existential threat of our civilization today no longer allows us the long suffering to wait until the scientists blocking the new technologies become extinct. For example, if we have to wait so long until the scientists blocking the use of zero-point energy become extinct, we would tragically have to accept that millions or billions of other innocent people die as well. I would wish that such a drama does not happen. So we have to act before the majority of scientists will be convinced of the usability of zero-point energy in general. Nevertheless, in the recent years, I am astonished to find that a remarkably growing number of professional colleagues, especially at the university and the top institutes, begin to develop interest in the topic of zero-point energy. They are fascinated, sometimes even really enthusiastic, and their wish for scientific discussion is increasing enormously. Only a few years ago I could have hardly imagined how many honorable and highly respected peers secretly turned to me on the condition of secrecy with a request for technical explanations, for tutoring in terms of zero-point energy, for the development of working plans, and of physical and technical explanations and technical discussions. They asked me to make construction plans and to explain in detail how to build a zero-point energy converter. Such questions come from university as well as from industrial companies, but there is always the condition that they want to work without me. I should give them technical advice, but I should not be allowed to participate in the scientific game. This would mean that I should be excluded even from going into the lab. The Nobel University professor wants to have the Nobel Prize. I have even heard this explicitly in the form that one of these Nobel laureates explained to me. You are the greatest physicist since Albert Einstein, but I want to gain the Nobel Prize. So please explain me how that works, and I will do it here in my lab. The wording at the companies sounds only slightly different. We build it in our laboratory. You, Turtur, can get consulting contract for hourly wages. And then I ask, is it really certain that the device is brought out in a timely manner for the benefit of the whole humanity? You have to produce and sell them in large numbers for all people, for everybody. I can only hear the answers like the following. Of course not. We decide at which time the device will be released for the benefit of our major shareholders. Or something like this. How long the device will remain inside the safe deposit box will be decided by our board of directors. Whether it is released for marketing, at which time it might be released for marketing, or not, is always done for the financial benefit of our shareholders. This is how the company's employees speak. I am convinced that someone who finances my research can earn a lot of money with it, a quite large amount of money. But I further think that my entire life project, Free Energy for All People, must also benefit to everybody by preserving the planet, by giving free energy to all people really for free, so that people will have to buy only the engines which utilizes the zero-point energy and converts it into the classical energy. Such zero-point energy converters shall be sold and bought in the same way as classic engines, but the energy itself does not have to be bought anymore. Technically, we can produce zero-point energy magnetic motors that can generate electricity for a fraction of today's cost, so cheap that everybody on Earth has an advantage, both in rich countries as well as in the poorest countries, and that all people live better than before. How much the colleagues at the universities and at the top institutes refuse to concede their burgeoning interest in new zero-point energy technologies to the outside that has not exchanged during many centuries and during many generations of mankind. A good example, therefore, is the invention of aviation. I will explain this symptomatic example reciting the history. The brothers Wilbur and Orville Wright were by profession two bicycle mechanics who earned their livelihood by running a bicycle workshop. In 1903 they built first primitive model of a motor plane, which they named Kitty Hawk. The first flight attempts were very tedious and not very impressive, but they constantly improved their airplane. Eventually they came to the point that they flew to the patent office to file a patent there. So they landed in the meadow next to the patent office, went in and wanted to file their patent application, coupled with a flight demonstration as proof. They justified their suggestion for the method of verification proof by saying that the plane was too large to be carried through the door into the patent office, and so they asked the patent office staff to look out the window and watch them fly. How great the disappointed of the two brothers may have been when they heard that the patent office staff were laughing at them, unwilling to look out the window. The view of the employees of the patent office was quite simple. Ha 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 ha! Birds can fly, but not humans. We know since Montgolfier that only can fly which is lighter than air, such as for instance a hot air balloon. The Wright brothers countered by arguing that birds are also heavier than air, otherwise they would not be able to jump around in the meadow. But nobody wanted to hear that, and certainly not at the patent office. Finally, the two unlucky brothers could only start their plane and fly, unseen, away from the patent office to their home. Unfortunately, the press also refused to report on the flight demonstrations. A special method of censorship, or rather self-censorship, which has survived up to nowadays. This made the work of the two brothers much more complicated, similar as we inventors experience today. So the Wright brothers had only one way to publish, namely by flying along the regional railway line as often as possible, always up and down, as soon as a train came, in order to be seen by as many railway passengers as possible. By this publication method, the Wright brothers achieved that more and more people spoke about their motor flight from mouth to mouth. And finally the story reached President Roosevelt after 5 years of flight demonstration in 1908. The President ordered from above, what we call order by boss, that the university professors of the country must watch the flight demonstrations. Thus, finally it was officially stated, flying is possible. How that worked was still unknown by the scientists and the universities, but it could not be denied any longer that they saw the working aviation device. For the reason of fairness, I should mention that the Wright brothers were not the first to invent flying. They only were the first who had the stamina to talk about the usability of zero-point energy, of the possibility of motor flight, until the public could not ignore it anymore. In fact, the farmer Richard Pearse, living in New Zealand, took off just a few months before the legendary Kitty Hawk flight. Richard Pearse was able to fly a distance of more than 320 meters, which is about 10 times as much as the Kitty Hawk's maiden flight. Some aviation theory experts also believe that Gustav Whitehead, a German living in Connecticut, managed to fly more than 2 kilometers in the air just 2 years before the Wrights' flight. The special benefit of the Wright brothers is not the technical achievement, the invention of flying, but the persistence of overcoming the blockade of the press and the boycott of the universities. It would be funny to know, but I'll probably never will get this information, how many university professors were interested in the work of the Wright brothers even before the flight demonstration was ordered by President Roosevelt. On this background, I once pronounced a mournful but logical sentence. Scientists have a reputation for being knowledgeable. In order not to endanger their reputation, they deal with things they know and avoid things they do not know about. That's why science confines itself to known facts and prevents new unknown knowledge. And that sentence is rather realistic. To illustrate this, let's just have a look at how many of the great inventors and inventions we know do not originate from universities. Just a few examples. Bell and the telephone, Parsons, Tesla and the steam turbine, Tesla and the electricity generator, Edison and the light bulb, Marconi, Tesla and the wireless telegraphy, the Wright brothers and the motor flight, Carl Benz, Gottlieb Daimler and the car, Lumière with his movie at the cinema, Otto and Diesel and their fuel engines, Mergenthaler, Otto and the jigging machine, George Eastman and the celluloid movie, Wegener and the continental shift, Baird and the television, Whittle and the jet engine, Chester Charleston and the xerography, Eckert and Mauchly and the commercial computers, Edwin Land and the Polaroid photography, Christopher Cockerell and the hovercraft, Fritz Haber, a historian by self-study to the liquefaction of the atmospheric nitrogen, Carl Freiherr von Drais and the bicycle, Michael Faraday, the bookbinder and electrodynamics, Joule the brewer and the energy unit, Robert Meyer, the physician who discovered energy conservation, which he wanted to publish but was ignored by the journal Annalen der Physik. His work was bullied by the experts until he finally landed into the mental hospital. Only years later, thanks to the support of Friedrich Schönbein, a famous colleague, he became well known and his law of energy conservation became generally accepted, so that he quickly recovered and was well. It is clear without mentioning that not a single of these discoveries or inventions from this list was made at a university. Certainly many more examples could be given. university and the professors working there are excellently suited to work up well-known facts and to develop well-founded theories, but to discover something completely new, it's simply not in their range. This is not the task of universities. So if we quote a university, or if we use and apply university knowledge, then we always do this with a background. Even the hardest and most vicious skeptic cannot deny the correctness of this knowledge. Using the university's knowledge, we have a profound and well-founded basis of generally recognized academic facts on which we can build everything we develop. But we must always keep in mind that this is only a basis for the development of something new. It is a really small basis due to the self-imposed blockade of thoughts at the universities. The extent of the problem can be seen in the following quote. It is impossible to study physics at any university anywhere in the world, because everything is taught there is half refuted, and on the other half it is irrelevant. The relevant physics takes place only behind the closed doors of laboratories of armaments and industry. The researchers who work there use laws of nature that are not known to university professors. End of quotation. And that's not from anyone, but it is from Robert Laughlin, Nobel Prize laureate in physics of the year 1998. He expresses this as an insider because he not only worked at the university but also at the nuclear weapon laboratory Livermore. Besides, he did not just say it somehow, but he wrote it visually in one of his books, namely in the book entitled The Crime of Reason and the Closing of the Scientific Mind. And if we want to understand this title, which contains the word crime and closing of mind in the knowledge-based society, then we just hear another of his quotes. We live in a knowledge society that allows free access to information. But a paradoxical situation has long since arisen. Knowledge is dangerous. The opportunities to acquire knowledge can lead to significant conflicts. What can I know? This question might become a key issue in our information age. Those who acquire knowledge, and especially technical knowledge, can quickly come to the brink of legality. The more powerful technologies are, the less the knowledge about these technologies become freely accessible. End of my translation of the quote. The question then arises, who actually decides which of the knowledge, which of the natural laws being reproducible by laboratory measurements is regarded as legal and which is not? From the point of view of the zero-point energy research, one must recognize that not one single invention came from a university, but all inventions came from outside the university, often being disprised from university. I would like to show some examples here. The magnetic motor of the engineer Friedrich Lühling is shown in a UFA newsreel. The UFA newsreels that were the news in the 1950s and 1960s for all people who had no television at home at that time. The UFA newsreels came in the cinemas in Germany in front of all films. Today the old contributions can be found in the German Federal Archives. The here mentioned contribution to the zero-point energy, whose link is shown in the screen now, is the second in the mentioned newsreel and starts at minute 1:51. Also, the reason is mentioned by the inventor why the zero-point energy engine could not emerge even in those days, because the film excerpt ends with the words "let freeze" and "sabotage." Terawattcom introduces an electric motor that consumes 200 watts of electrical power but delivers just over 600 watts of mechanical power to a rotating shaft. The setup looks somehow similar to a normal electrical engine, as the website sometimes disappears from the internet and returns and disappears and returns and so on. It can often only be accessed via a so-called Wayback Machine, such as, for instance, the Internet Archive, whose links you can now see on the screen. The special feature of the terawatt device is that the efficiency of just more than 300% in terms of classical type of energy is confirmed by expert reports from the major testing institutes, from TÜV Rheinland and from the highly respected American Underwriters Laboratories. Another example is Lutech, an Australian zero-point energy engine with an efficiency of just more than 1400%. They give electrical power into the input and get electrical power from the output. The expert organization which elaborated the test report is the Société Générale de Surveillance, the largest inspection organization on this earth, a Switzerland expert association of about 60,000 employees. This machine has now disappeared from the internet. It did not, as originally hoped, come on the market, but the report about it can be read at several internet addresses, as shown on the screen just now. If not accessible at some time, it can also be retrieved via the Internet Archive. The so-called Magnetstromapparat and the Stromerzeuger by Hans Koehler is the next example. Hans Koehler was a German sea captain who started his zero-point energy work in the 1920s with the idea of supplying submarines. His work of a zero-point energy converter and operation has been found at 4 universities, namely in Munich, in Copenhagen, in Trondheim and in Berlin. Finally, Hans Koehler was questioned by the English intelligence service in order to explain his engine to the employees of the Secret Service. He gave these explanations. The intelligence reports were initially put under secrecy during the Second World War, but they are now, albeit incomplete, to be read in the internet, and they can be obtained from the Jupiter Falak in Switzerland, in printed form. The reference link to the intelligence report is written on the screen now. Next example. A research paper by the world-famous Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the MIT, in which an efficiency of just over 200%, actually about 230%, was published in one of the leading scientific journals in physics. The link can now be seen on the screen. Although there is still a discussion about thermodynamic effects, namely about the academic question of whether the small light-emitting diodes under investigation gain additional zero-point energy or whether they exchange entropy with the quantum vacuum. But the proof for the coefficient of performance above unity is clear, and for the rescue of the environment, this academic difference between energy exchange and entropy exchange with the quantum vacuum should not be regarded as really important. Here it can be seen that even an established scientific institute is no longer completely ignoring the topic of zero-point energy. I have presented my own work on hundreds of pages in the internet for free download. You can see the links to my publications now. I always emphasize that I did not discover anything new with my work, but I only use recognized knowledge which can be found in all good physics textbooks. The only thing that I have made new is I introduced some order into the well-known knowledge, such that the puzzle pieces of the knowledge are rearranged a little bit, so that a beautiful picture is obtained. Sometimes I thought or hoped I made new discoveries, but I always had to realize that all of my findings already have been known. In any case, collections of my results are available for free download under the internet address shown here on the screen: open source, free energy for all people, and free knowledge for all people. Everything I did is published. I developed the fundamental theory of zero-point energy conversation, and I verified it in the university lab. Furthermore, I developed construction guidelines for powerful zero-point energy self-running magnetic motors. A battery that does not get empty for 175 years is located in the Clarendon Laboratory at Oxford University. This tells us that an elite university has even got a source of never-ending energy, which already got its way into Wikipedia. At the time of talking, the slide lecture presented here, however, it can only be seen in English Wikipedia, not in the German version. It is not yet clear whether this battery works on the basis of zero-point energy or not. But fact is that you can use such endless batteries for mobile phones and laptops during several years without any necessity to recharge the battery. This is without the necessity to use the charging device connected to the power grid at all. Furthermore, these endless batteries show how cheap electricity can be. Following the instruction of the meanwhile deceased Luxembourg electrician Guy Harry, I reproduced some endless batteries which have only a finite life, but even with a lifespan of 5 or 10 years, it would be no problem to provide them to mobile phones or similar devices driven by batteries. If we calculate the price of the material, the costs of electrical energy can certainly be kept below 1 cent per kilowatt hour. US Navy to turn seawater into jet fuel. It's hard to believe, but they can really turn seawater into gasoline. And this is being reported in the big general daily press. Unfortunately, this development, which is already fully under operation, is only available to the military, but not to the general public, not to people like you and me. The Klimov process is also available only to the military, and it is not offered to the public. A solid-state physical method to transform zero-point energy is presented by the Los Alamos laboratory, where a few decades ago J. Robert Oppenheimer invented the atomic bomb. With the Klimov method, lasers can be supplied endlessly so that soldiers can use laser firearms similar to Star Wars endlessly without having to carry along ammunition and without having to reload. Howard Johnson's patent magnet motor was presented at United States patent number 4151431. It is symptomatic for a whole series of functioning magnetic motors developed from high-tech hands, that is, people who are absolutely at the forefront of technology and who know exactly how to implement such developments. Such magnetic engines are not objects for hobbyists, but typically for full-time professionals, as we see at the successful example of Howard Johnson as well. Brilliant light power was developed by Dr. Randall Mill, who graduated at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His device is already published on the world-famous CNN channel. He no longer works at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Behind his invention also stand 20 years of hard research with a highly qualified, full-time, full professional team and excellent laboratory equipment. Numerous other examples are known of zero-point energy converters, which can be found in the internet. Some of them are reported in a wonderful overview in the book Die Urkraft aus dem Universum, literally translated Primary Force from the Universe, written by Klaus Jebens, which can still be bought today in the Jupiter Falak in Switzerland. The book is strongly recommended to everybody who is interested in zero-point energy and can be read in German language. Klaus Jebens came to the topic of zero-point energy because his father Heinrich Jebens traveled to America in 1930 as head of the German governmental inventors office with a task to bring Thomas Alva Edison a Medal of Honor from his official German agency. At this trip to the United States, he was fortunate to get the possibility to meet the legendary Nikola Tesla, and he even was allowed to take a ride with Tesla's zero-point energy car. Thereby he saw Tesla, together with his assistant, how they started the zero-point energy converter and put the car into operation. When driving, they reached a speed of 145 km per hour with their Pierce Arrows car, that had a design not far away from an old coach as being displayed now in the picture. The car had no tank, no battery, and no energy storage at all. We see that the university's thinking blockade is beginning to crumble, but we have to assume that the thought blockade will only be fully removed when the zero-point energy engines are already present in most of the houses and in many cars, as well as in very many technical devices, and when many industrial companies already use them. At that point in time, the press will finally have to give up its concealment, because the zero-point energy engines will be well known to everybody, so that hiding by the press will be simply not possible any further. This behavior of the press is unchanged during many centuries. We understand this when remembering the experience of Galileo Galilei, whose scientific results have been kept secret by the press for a really long time. Oh, how many centuries have passed until the press began to report that the Earth is following an orbit around the Sun. The typical behavior of the press, avoiding new information, did not change since the time of Galileo Galilei. This style is today known in business administration under the name of management by information. It is neither the intent nor the purpose of the present slide lecture to charge the colleagues at the universities. Finally, when the zero-point energy converters will have arrived at the majority of the people, the universities will also begin to focus more intensively on this topic, and at this time they will increase their knowledge in the field so far that zero-point energy machines will be massively optimized. Great new steps of knowledge do not come from universities, but they are always ideal for small incremental improvements. I always feel a certain contentment due to the insight how many zero-point energy devices already have been seen in our world. This impressively emphasizes the functionality of this special scientific field. Of course, inexperienced listeners might now ask, if there are already so many machines existing, why do we not get them, we, the consumers? The answer is relatively simple and logical. There are powerful people in the energy industry who have a massive interest in not allowing the free energy devices for all people. Somebody still gains a lot of money as long as we consumers need to buy some energy-carrying substances to drive our motors and engines, and this is a thousands of billion dollars income. If you want to understand the dimensions of the problem, please have a look to the internet page PaceWiki Suppression. There you will find dozens of case studies of suppression in the field of free energy research, together with statistics that I like to briefly reproduce here on the screen. Please take a closer look, see details, then you will see that there is even talk of dead and disappeared people. It is well known that the oil industry is not one of the most squeamish and considerate sectors. If it were otherwise, the word oil warfare would never have reached its common notoriety, which it has today. The question of how many people have died for the sake of oil capture cannot be answered by anybody today. Fact is that even the alleged scientific study on the so-called peak oil problem, also known as the global oil production maximum, is an extremely questionable study. If you read again on Wikipedia, but other sources confirm that too, then you will find quite interesting facts. The concept of a maximum of the oil production originates from the geologist Marion King Hubbard, going back to his work in the 1950s. In 1974, he predicted the maximum oil production for the year 1995. Today everybody knows that this is definitely wrong. But why do people take such errors serious today, and why are the doubts to Mr. Hubbard's erroneous statements not discussed everywhere? Mr. Hubbard worked as a doctoral student for 2 years at the Amarada Petroleum Company, and then from 1943 to 1964, more than 20 years at the Shell Oil Company. In this period, he also developed his peak oil issue, namely in the 1950s. Thereby he has made a significant contribution to keep the price of his employer's products high, a considerable economic success. Finally, Mr. Hubbard also received numerous honors, and from 1963 to 1968 he was professor for geology and geophysics at Stanford University, and from 1973 to 76 at Berkeley University. The only question is, why do we still seriously consider the peak oil nonsense of a 1950s Shell employee? Meanwhile, it has long known that the oil is not running out. Take a look at what the famous German television NTV reports. They write, going back to a statement of the Petroleum Industry Association, an end to the available oil reserves is not in sight in the foreseeable future, and this is a forecast for 2025. Those specialists know what they are saying and why we are not facing any peak oil problems. The reason is the discovery of the world's largest oil field ever in Australia. We read this in 2013 at the internet address you see here on the screen. The current estimation for just this one Australian oil field is 233 billion barrels of oil, which is almost as much as Saudi Arabia's total oil reserves at all. There we further read, the finding could even amount to 300 or 400 billions of barrels, which makes it the largest unconventional discovery we will see in our lives. This is what Dr. Kent Moores said. He is advisor to the 6 largest oil producers and to 20 reputable governments. And then we read, that means it's a complete fairy tale that petroleum should be finite, that petroleum could end, and that we are soon going to run dry. In reality, we are swimming on an ocean of oil. All the wars of the Americans are made because of oil, but not as everyone thinks to get it, but rather to keep it in the ground. The reason is, if all the sources of oil would be bubbling, this would spoil the oil price. Neither the Saudis nor the Americans want that. The lie about a scarcity of the oil and its near end are spread by the oil companies in order to keep the oil price nicely high. End of quotation of the specialist. Even more interesting is the finding that the Stockholm Royal Institute of Technology, Sweden's largest university, has proven that the oil is not for sure fossil at all. With the help of our research, we even know where oil can be found in Sweden, says Vladimir Kucherov, professor at the Royal University of Technology, Department of Energy Technology in Stockholm. This modern knowledge, the abiotic genesis of oil, replaces the obsolete understanding of Mikhail Vasilyevich Lomonosov. He was the founder of the Russian State University Moscow in 1755, so to say in the mid of 18th century. At the time of Lomonosov, mankind did not use as much oil as today, and the knowledge about oil was not as it is in our present time, so that Lomonosov's assumption the oil originates from rotted biomass of earlier Earth ages was quite plausible at his time. But already Stalin discovered that old closed Russian oil fields fill up from an unknown source by themselves, without human intervention, during the years. In the meantime, you can even read this knowledge in the Wall Street Journal and also in many other sources. Therefore, we do not need to be astonished anymore to read an article in the Focus Money Online from 26th of September 2014 entitled The Tale of the End of the Oil Boom, in which is reported, among other facts, it is remarkable that Hubbard assumed the oil to be a fossil fuel, a biological substance made from dinosaur remains, ancient trees and other life forms from 500 million years ago, as unscientific as the oil man underpinned the theory of fossil origin of the oil, as unprofessional is also his estimate of the amount of the remaining recoverable oil reserves in the United States. And then the article quotes Mr. King Hubbard himself when he was saying, we drew the curve, calculated the squares, and if the result was a bit too high, it was counted down. If it was a bit too low, it was counted a little bit up. Mathematics was not involved. This is what Marion King Hubbard says in a memorable interview in 1989. We further read, Hubbard did not take into account natural gas and coal at all, which he classified both as hydrocarbons or fossil fuels. After all that, the only remaining question is, why, for heaven's sake, do people have to die for oil? The answer is as simple as it is logical. Because we deliberately and consequently exclude zero-point energy in the same manner as the Vikings excluded the seal meat. Thus, some alternatives have to appear, but mostly people only have a classical energy turnaround in mind, probably due to a lack of information about better alternatives. The classical energy turnaround. In Nucleopedia we read that there are around 100 new nuclear power plants being planned worldwide just now. Simply follow the link you see in the screen now. More than 30 nuclear power plants are actually planned in China. In addition, some more in India, in Iran, and a whopping 9 such in Japan. What a wonder, several new nuclear power plants for Western Europe, and more than 20 in Russia, 10 more in America, and so on. French companies are also very active internationally. Reading an article by the official Südwestdeutscher Rundfunk, we would also regret that Germany loses its nuclear competence. Among other things we read there, although reactor safety and radiation research had experienced an interim high following after the Fukushima catastrophe, this impetus is over now, and it looks as if even the Helmholtz research centers want to withdraw from the nuclear sector. Same as everywhere in Germany, for the leading nuclear research center in Jülich, this retreat is already decided. And also other literature sources let us understand that it is no longer reactor safety which is at the forefront, but cheap power generation. This becomes so much important that the famous journal Spiegel even writes private nuclear power plants in all households, micro power plants, the attack of the electrical GNOME power plants. This is what we can read in Spiegel. It's hard to believe, but in England and in the United States there are a number of startup companies, small and medium-sized businesses, working to develop small mini power plants in the range of approximately 100 kilowatts for the private front yard. The Spiegel reports in the above-mentioned article even from an official paper of the European Commission, which calls ambitious targets for the new energy technology, telling us for the year 2030 the first small nuclear power facilities should be under operation. This is within only a bit more than 10 years. Submarines can already be driven by nuclear power aggregates. Now such aggregates could also be used on land for private households. According to the article, the umbrella organization World Nuclear Association promises that in the year 2030 already 96 such small mini nuclear power plants will be in use. Isn't it funny? Is there anybody here among the audience who is afraid of a dirty nuclear bomb? Terrorists can easily take the material from the neighbor's front yard. Or is someone worried about the disposal of the many radioactive waste? Don't worry, be happy, everything will be fine. Even the new Cadillac cars will be wonderful cars. 8 grams of radioactive thorium as a fuel can last for 100,000 kilometers at a mileage of 10,000 kilometers per year, altogether 1 million of kilometers. This is a nuclear drive for cars. Is there anyone in the audience who is afraid of car accidents? Don't worry, be happy, everything will be fine. The decay of radioactive waste from the thorium nuclear power plants is much more harmless than the decay of radioactive waste from the large uranium power plants. The uranium waste takes millions of years until the radiation will be disappeared, whereas the radioactivity of the thorium will have subsided within a few 100,000 years. That's a terrific improvement. So there will be no problems at all. Everything will be fine if we solve our energy problem by this way. Sure, you notice the cynicism in my words, but things get even more worse. It can always be worse. The next and even more worse catastrophe is called methane hydrate. Although we can be happy that it is not radioactive, it is still much more worse. If you ignite a lump of methane hydrate with a match, it starts to burn, looking similar like a piece of as-bit dry spirit, which is being set on fire. That's fine, because according to the current estimates, science considers the global energy reserves in methane hydrate about twice as large as global energy reserves in oil. So mankind actually discovered a huge new source of energy. Reason to enjoy? No. Because the methane hydrate has 2 disadvantages. First, the gas is 20 times as climate effective as carbon dioxide, and second, the excavation of the methane hydrate makes the seabed unstable. This will cause an immense danger for tsunami waves, and the stability of the continental plates, according to Alfred Wegener, will come into danger. Point number 1 is self-explanatory and thus immediately clear. Point number 2 needs explanation. The hydrated methane is in our usual ambient conditions. This is at room temperature and normal air pressure in the gaseous aggregate state, but at the pressure of 200 bar or more, it is in the solid state. Such pressure is not unusual on the seabed, because 2000 meters of water depth produce the necessary pressure of 200 bar. And what lies deeper in the ocean has correspondingly higher pressure, so that the methane hydrate from 2000 meters water depth and deeper occurs everywhere naturally in the solid state. There it holds the sand of the seabed in its position, and therefore it carries the nickname cement of the seabed. This is because sea sand usually floats in the seawater. As we all know, when we build sand castles in our holidays on the beach, the sand is washed away by ocean waves. Each of us experienced this on vacation on the sandy beach. Within a few minutes or hours, nothing is left of our sand castles once the tide is coming. This is especially well known in Hamburg, where the river Elbe has to be dredged all the time in order to preserve the depth of the fairway for the big ships. If they would not dig away the sand there all the time, which the seawater constantly flushes in, then the big ships could soon no longer enter the harbor of Hamburg. Also, the huge offshore windmills, which are in the North Sea in decent quantities, are built into the sand, because there is no other soil formation in the sea region, will overturn within a few years because the seawater washes away the sand of the foundations. That the seawater flushes the sand around the windmills and thus makes the whole windmills tilting is certainly not nice, and among some politicians it is also a tedious discussion. But if the seawater washes away the sand around the continental plates, according to Alfred Wegener, this would be an absolute total catastrophe, because the land we live on would tip over and sink into the sea. The fact that this does not happen is due to the methane hydrate, which in its immense amount and its capacity as cement of the seabed holds the sand in position at the foot of the continental plates, thus fixing the entire continental plates. Just keep in mind how wonderful the nature works. But then mankind is coming. When humanity removes the methane hydrate, the continental plates lose their stability. In science, see for example a study of the University of Paderborn, the phenomenon is known under the name Storegga slide or Storegga avalanche. The name Storegga slide goes back to the fact that about 10 or 20,000 years ago a part of the Scandinavian subcontinent slipped away west of Norway due to the fact that a natural incident removed the methane hydrate from the seabed. However, such incidents are accompanied by climate warming, namely because of the greenhouse effect mentioned above, which far exceeds the effect of the carbon dioxide. 55 millions of years ago, such global warming was due to the methane hydrate occurred by as much as 8 degrees of Celsius. By the way, I should mention that a single liter of solid methane hydrate, when being brought up from the seabed, gives 163 liters of methane gas. But the most dramatical problem is the following. Countries like India, Japan, South Korea and China are already developing plans to mine the methane hydrate from the sea. Japan hopes to start commercial mining in 2018. We can only hope that they will not manage it. Klaus Wallmann from the Leibniz Institute of Marine Sciences at IFM Geomar in Kiel says, according to our current estimates, there are between 1,000 and 5,000 gigatons of carbon on the sea bottom. That's about 10 times more than you find in conventional gas deposits. Stefan Singer, Director of Global Energy Policy at the World Wildlife Fund International Foundation for the Environment, characterizes methane hydrate mining as following. This is an expression of a completely failed climate policy, using sources such as methane hydrate or even shale gas means completely abandoning from all what is needed. Could you imagine anything which exceeds such evil? I cannot think of anything more evil. As for the catastrophe for the planet or Mother Earth, we are going directly into the death. I can only think about how to prevent the catastrophe, namely by using zero-point energy. And there is much more zero-point energy available than all the methane hydrate and all the oil and gas and uranium and thorium together. Also, the next story should make us think. This is a short but meaningful video, just a bit more than 2 minutes, in which Thomas Spahn speaks in Wirtschaft Plus, Economy Plus, literally translated. He talks about electric cars. I am glad that he also thinks about the rescue of our Earth and considers the total ecological balance of the electric cars. He speaks, saving the Earth with the electric cars is a great idea. It's just a shame that this climate-friendly vision fails because of reality. End of translated quotation. Of course, we all know that we are misled to believe that electric cars are climate-friendly. With these false promises, electromobility is promoted and advertised to us, the consumers. But how the reality looks, however, is shown by a study of the Stockholm Environmental Research Institute (EVL), in which was calculated how much carbon dioxide the production of a battery for a Tesla S electric car produces. It is as many as 17 tons of carbon dioxide just for the production of the battery. If you were able to drive the car completely with 100% green electricity, this means you consequently charge the batteries consistently only from windmill and solar cell electricity, then you would have reached the benefit of zero regarding the ecological balance only after 200,000 kilometers. This means that after 200,000 kilometers, the environmental carbon dioxide pollution is the same as with a simple classical diesel car with a mileage of 200,000 kilometers. Additionally, we have to keep in mind that 50% of our typical electrical power which we use to charge our car accumulators is produced from coal and gas. Thus it would take you 400,000 kilometers just only to get the zero balance between the electrical car and the classical old-fashioned diesel. This balance is the same for public charging stations as for private plug sockets at home because the power comes from the public power grid. With a lifespan of 8 years for the battery, the consumer would therefore have to drive at least a minimum of 50,000 kilometers per year if he wants to avoid that an electric car in the overall environmental balance is worse than a classical diesel. That's why Wirtschaft Plus concludes its contribution with the words, "Electric cars will only become eco-friendly if refueling the batteries is done completely without any fossil energy, and the electrical energy supply to charge is produced exclusively with regenerative energies. But that should take decades of years. Until then, climate-friendly e-cars are unfortunately an illusion. And let's be honest, self-deception is most beautiful if you can share it with many other people." End of translated quotation. I can only add my comment. If the batteries would be completely omitted and the electric cars would be driven 100% with zero-point energy, then from the very first kilometer a positive environmental balance would result. In meantime, the calculation results of the Stockholm Environmental Institute EVL have also reached the media outside Sweden, but nobody seems to take notice of this in public discussions. Even the widespread Taz reports it. Whether these stories of lies with which we let ourselves take away our own mobility are even worse than the topic of nuclear power plants or methane hydrate, I do not want to discuss. It will always be bad enough if we allow our own individual mobility to become more and more expensive until we finally have to give it up, and only the very few super extreme rich people can afford private cars. Nowadays I have to pay for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity between 25 and 30 cents, but for 1 kilowatt hour contained in gasoline only between 5 and 6 cents. Not only the electric cars are much more expensive than gasoline cars, but mainly the motor fuel is the price booster. Thus, dear audience, I ask you, how do you get to the new company when you start your new job? Surely it is not a catastrophe for the planet of Earth and not for our environment if you, dear listeners, cannot come to your new work in the morning. But is that as easy for you to handle as it is for the planet? If the electrification of individual mobility continues, as the planning suggests now, you will not be able to afford to drive your own cars to the company where you are working in foreseeable future. You yourself should think about whether you will like that. For these considerations, please also keep in mind that only 60% of one single annual production of the world's automotive industry is already enough to exhaust the worldwide lithium reserve completely. Then you will still see almost all people driving with gasoline and diesel cars, but these cars could be so significantly limited in the foreseeable future that they no longer meet the legal exhaust fume cleanliness requirements, and then you are forced by law to switch to electric cars, but you cannot because there is no lithium to build electric car batteries. Then you, dear listener, will face a world peak lithium problematic, and this might occur pretty soon. The question is, do you really want such a decline of your individual mobility? I don't want it. I would know how to build and operate electric cars, namely with zero-point energy. Nikola Tesla demonstrated this at the early 1930s, as mentioned above. This can be read, for example, in the book Die Urkraft aus dem Universum. Klaus Jebens, the author, was the son of Heinrich Jebens, who traveled to America in 1930 as director of the first German House of Inventors and later chief of the German Reichserfinderamt in order to convey a Medal of Honor to Thomas Alva Edison. On this trip he met Nikola Tesla and he was allowed to participate a ride with Tesla's zero-point energy car. It's an uplifting story that Klaus Jebens told me a few years ago, and fortunately he also documented this in the mentioned book. As realistic as these gruesome representations are, I think it is now the time to stop discussing the classic energy turnaround. In the second part of our video we want to turn our attention to the positive chances of convenient change. If we follow the concept of classical energy turnaround, sooner or later we would only have two options, namely either the energy poverty for all. By the way, quite a remarkable number of people are already freezing in the winter because they can no longer afford to warm up their rooms, even in industrial companies like in Germany. Or secondly, alternative, the possibility of destroying the Earth, making our planet uninhabitable for humans. How likely as the latter version appears can be seen from the fact that the construction of bunkers where a few people seek to hide in the event of a doomsday is one of the most booming industries in the Western world right now. All this will not be necessary at all if we provide the zero-point energy to all people. Then all people will have a manageable wealth. Then all can live under fair conditions. The poor will become a little bit more prosperous, the rich will become even richer, and we all keep our civilization alive as it is now, so that we can basically continue our lives as we are used to, just a little more comfortable. A decline to the death is not what we want to have. Prosperity becomes possible when we launch a sensible energy turnaround, that is, drive cars without gasoline and batteries, install indoor zero-point energy converters that supply us with electricity and energy for heating. We can supply our industry with zero-point energy. This will give a positive increase of production. The price of electricity in the house will be less than 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour. Our mobile phones and laptops will be supplied with durable endless batteries, so that we no longer need battery charges. Industrial companies are supplied by powerful self-running magnetic motors on the basis of zero-point energy converters, so that industrial energy costs are well below 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour. For instance, at a few hundreds of cents per kilowatt hour. And there are also some other tasks that we can solve relatively easy with zero-point energy. From all those many good perspectives for our planet Earth, I would like to talk in the further course of the video presented here. If we do not act timely and decidedly now, that is, if we do not soon accept to utilize the zero-point energy, then we will run into a horror scenario as we previously reported. But it would be a sad version of life which makes no hope for future. I do not want to live like this, but I live for acting and actually bringing free energy to all people. The zero-point energy of the quantum vacuum. Using this absolutely clean energy, we will end up in a positive scenario, in a better future, not in a mere hope, but in an actually better world. Essentially, it's only the question of whether we as humanity can bring ourselves to give up our own self-destruction through the wrong energy supply, and to accept a positive energy supply. So seal meat instead of beef. That was the motto 500 years ago, and today it is free energy, zero-point energy instead of classical energy. The zero-point energy turnaround. The introduction of zero-point energy would mean the complete end of all energy wars. This is clear anyway. Not only are we talking about the much-cited oil wars, but we also have in mind that even the Mali military mission, which is coming into the public focus now in 2017, is being discussed in the press as France's concern for uranium from the desert, as written by Arvid Kaiser, and further, Niger's uranium, France's African energy source, and further on, the war in Mali is closely connected to the supply of raw material for the nuclear state of France. In the neighboring Niger, the most important source of uranium because insecure. The current weakness of the nuclear fuel market is a source of further unrest in the region. Let us also remember that France has the most nuclear power plants in the whole of the European Union, namely 71 units, more than Germany and the huge Russia together. And let us also remember that France supplies nuclear power to its neighboring countries. The fact that a leading newspaper like the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung even writes the uranium in Mali demonstrates the significant meaning of the problem, even if the journalists claim that this has nothing to do with a military operation there. Our world is sinking into so many wars, as never before on Earth, as the statistics show here on the screen. And I wonder sometimes if there is at least one single war that has nothing to do with energy among the actual ongoing wars. I gave the promise not to moan in the second part of the video, but rather to show the positive image of the world that we reach as soon as we actually use the zero-point energy. Yes, the first important aspect that I want to present here is peace all over the world. As soon as we supply zero-point energy everywhere, all people on Earth have unlimited energy available without having to fight for it. Energy wars are completely eliminated. But free zero-point energy will give us much more benefit by far. It will open up living comfort in places where we could not see any opportunity for improvement before without zero-point energy. These are improvements for which nobody could get sufficiently enough energy because of energy prices and because of availability of the energy. Zero-point energy is much more available than all energy sources of this earth together. Zero-point energy is unlimited. Its supplies are as large as the space of the universe itself, as large as the entire universe. Zero-point energy is for free at all time, at every place, technically reliable for everybody, free from any environmental pollution and friendly to health. Some skeptics have asked me if we do not change the universe if we extract zero-point energy from it. Yes, of course we do. By nature, the universe expands. If it is getting bigger and bigger all the time, and this expansion is actually accelerating, which is incidentally an effect that has not yet been understood by the standard model of astrophysics at the universities, but the effect is proven meteorologically by observing the motions of the galaxies. These measurements have been performed by using telescopes, and if we, as humans, take a little amount of energy from the universe, then this expansion will not continue its acceleration quite as much as before. Since we, as humanity, are extremely tiny compared to the universe, the effect of what we take from the universe is so minimal that no one can notice, even not with the most highly elaborated measuring devices. I sometimes compare the situation with the ocean. Imagine you travel to the seaside, dip a finger to take a drop of water and taste the salty seawater. Doing so, in fact, you extracted water from the sea. But do you think that the fish will notice how the sea is emptying? Do the fish notice that the volume of the water in which they can swim is reduced? Of course not. In reality, the sea is constantly expanding. Everywhere, the sea level rises, on the one hand due to the warming of the oceans, and on the other hand due to the fact that per day about 40 tons of meteorites from the universe are landing on the Earth and stay here. There are many ice crumbs among these meteorites, which simply change into water vapor due to the glowing when they enter the Earth's atmosphere. So ultimately they produce tons of extraterrestrial rain every day. This is so much more than the droplet which you took with your finger at the coast of seawater. So you can justifiably claim that your removing the seawater did not harm the environment at all. Incidentally, you do not keep the water inside your body, but your body excretes it again. Likewise, the zero-point energy converter does not retain the energy in itself, but it also eliminates it after use. The converter gives back the energy to the quantum vacuum of the universe, from where it had extracted it just before use. Ultimately, we have to conclude that the water always runs back into the sea and the energy always runs back into the universe. Nevertheless, on the way from the sea to the sea, you can enjoy the holiday taste of the salty water droplet, and on the way from the universe back to the universe, you can enjoy the benefits of the zero-point energy. As an example, I now want to enumerate some few techniques with which you can use the free zero-point energy. However, this is not designed to be an extensive technical lecture, and I explicitly claim the following enumeration to be incomplete. The only goal I am following is to show how to cover the different needs of energy with different possible zero-point energy devices. It goes without saying that people will invent a lot more of free energy conversions during the following decades or centuries of use. Example number 1. Endless batteries. These are batteries which never go empty. Typically, applications are small consumers, such as cell phones and laptops, which can be equipped with a permanent battery in the ideal case, so that no charger is needed anymore. Also, new batteries in the standard formats like Mignon and Micro and similar products can be produced as never-ending batteries, which contain much more energy than classic batteries. It is not yet clear whether these endless batteries used zero-point energy or not, but their incredibly large energy density is clear. Classical alkaline batteries, such as those we buy today in the hardware store, have an energy density in the range of 80 watt-hours per liter. Modern mobile phones have high-performance batteries, which can be obtained on lithium-ion basis. They reach an energy density of about 500 watt-hours per liter. A fundamentally different dimension in principle offers auto fuel. Diesel is slightly better than premium gasoline and contains, after all, 200 watt-hours per liter. If we compare these with the endless batteries that some friends of mine have already made for experimental purpose, we see specimens up to 400,000 watt-hours per liter which have already been tested. But those samples are not empty yet, so it is not yet clear how much more energy they still contain. Probably quite a lot, because the tested samples up to now are nearly not reduced in their power output. If we set the material prices for these batteries in relation to the amount of energy they produce, then we get an electricity price between half a cent and 1 cent per kilowatt hour, not to forget that this is a price for energy from batteries. As I said, this price is not in competition with the electricity from sockets. For my consideration, 1 cent per kilowatt hour is essentially, hugely too expensive for stationary energy sources. This extremely large energy price of 1 cent per kilowatt hour is only necessary because the batteries are designed for mobile applications. This price is in competition with batteries from the supermarket, where we have to buy material in contrast to the socket which is connected to the public power grid. I already pointed out the oldest known long-life battery at the Oxford University. It is not at all clear if these batteries have anything to do with zero-point energy, but they are always an interesting source of energy. Endless batteries can cover a demand in the range of few watts because, on the one hand, the energy density is extremely high, but on the other hand, the power density is not very high. This means that only a moderate electrical current is flowing, but over an extremely long period of time. This is the reason why we have to speak only about a supply of small consumers, so from electric wristwatches over 1 watt up to 50 watts, as for example for cell phones and laptops and other small toys. To power a kitchen mixer or a vacuum cleaner with endless batteries would be absolutely uneconomical, not only much too expensive, but also still too big, too bulky and too laborious. These batteries are, of course, like all batteries, maintenance-free and noiseless. Additionally, the materials are absolutely environmental friendly: copper, aluminium, vinegar and lime powder. Even the metals in use are known from everyday life, and they are of course reusable as often as we like. I would not want to drive an e-bike with such a battery, a car certainly not, simply because this would be uneconomical. Wanting to power such larger consumers with batteries is as senseless as supplying a house with batteries. This has been discussed in the context of crystal cells, and it would be possible to build such a system that lasts for 50 years and supplies a house over 50 years, self-sufficient and independent of the electricity grid. Such discussions came up because some people compared the energy price of below 1 cent per kilowatt hour from endless batteries with the energy price of 25 or 30 cents per kilowatt hour from nowadays public grid, where there are far better systems for stationary application, as we'll see in the following minutes. Example number 2, motionless converters. These are electronic systems without mechanically moving components. The abbreviation motionless is no motion of any hardware components of the system. The only thing which is in motion are field quanta of the interacting field, for instance of the electromagnetic interaction. Thus, the basic functioning principle of the system can be explained by my theory of the finite propagation speed of the field flux quanta. No mechanical components are in motion, only field quanta. This has the great advantage to allow an operation absolutely free from wear and deterioration. However, due to the technical specifications, namely because of the propagation speed of the field flux quanta, high-frequency capable power electronics are required, leading to a limitation of power down and up. Therefore, motionless converters are typically suitable for the requirement in the range of 20 watts up to 2 kilowatts, or a few kilowatts. These systems are completely maintenance-free, noiseless, and can supply individual electric consumers such as vacuum cleaners, drilling engines, kitchen mixers, electric bicycle, flash lines, and so on. However, even here the technical complexity is still relatively high, so that the price of electricity is still a few tenths of a cent per kilowatt hour. Therefore, I suggest the use of motionless converters only predominantly for transportable consumers in mobile use. So, for example, for lawn mowers and e-bikes, or much more possibly also for electric cars. But for the car application, there are some very attractive alternatives, as will soon be presented. If a motionless converter produces about 200 watts from a volume of 1 liter, such a system can generate a nice support of a few hundred watts for an e-bike. If we have 300 liters of engine space in a car, you could also build a 60 kilowatt engine for the car, so to replace a gasoline car, well, with an electric car. But in practice we will not quite reach this amount of power because we still have to provide some of the volume to set up a good cooling system. So we can generate 30 or 40 kilowatts in reality from 300 liters of volume, or maybe 60 or 70 kilowatts from a volume of 500 liters. This is quite suitable for electric mobility, realistic and environmental friendly, but those who enjoy powerful cars will prefer a later example. The motionless converter does not have any lifetime limitation at all, especially since there is no wear by principle. Since manufacturing a motionless converter is in the same price range as producing a gasoline engine, it can be interesting to build electric cars with it. A further advantage is that the maintenance of electric cars powered by motionless converters is extremely low. So an auto inspection will be limited to testing assemblies such as brakes, steering, tires, etc. An engine maintenance is not necessary. As brilliant as the technology of the motionless converter is, Stefan Marinov showed a version in Austria. He was a physics professor at the University of Sofia in Bulgaria. I still consider a different zero-point energy converter for most powerful applications in mobile use, and this is what I want to speak about with the next example, the hydrogen system. Example number 3, hydrogen systems. The keywords here are HHO, Brown's gas according to Yul Brown, or water engine according to Stanley Meyer. Such systems are based on electrolysis of the water in over-unity, that is, they require input energy to operate, such as electrical energy, but they deliver significantly more energy in the output than they need for the input. In order to get a completely self-powered system driven 100% by zero-point energy, the energy supply for the operation must be taken from the energy output, and only the energy surplus in the output can be made available to the consumer. The size of the device can of course be largely adapted to the wishes of the consumers. There are no parts in motion, but we have to handle hydrogen gas and oxygen gas safely. The engines are filled with plain, clear water. One possibility of operation is to blow clean water vapor from the exhauster, which then turns into rain. Another possibility of operation is to trap the water vapor inside the system to condense it and then bring it back into the tank. The first mentioned variant has the advantage that we do not need a cooler. The second variant would need condensers and radiators. Nevertheless, the exhaust gases, if we decide to produce some, are absolutely harmless, even in the first variant, because it is only clean steam distilled from water. The second variant, however, works absolutely emission-free. Hydrogen converters cover the demand segment from a few hundred watts up to several hundred kilowatts, making these machines ideal for the automotive industry. The fun driver, who likes much more than the typical 50 or 80 horsepowers from a motionless converter of our example number 2, can be supplied with a machine of 200 or 300 or 500 or maybe 1000 horsepowers. Because several of these machines can be interconnected, they also can operate lorries, ships and airplanes, so they can cover the entire mobile transportation segment, also in business and economy applications. The system would be also completely adequate for supplying households, but we must seriously consider the next example for households because it will be even remarkably cheaper. Example number 4, the EMDR converter. I wrote the abbreviation EMDR for electromechanical double resonance converter. This is an example for a self-running magnet motor. There are also other self-running magnet motor systems well known in the zero-point energy community, but this EMDR system is the system with which I am most advanced from the point of view of theoretical development. However, it is also the most technically demanding system and therefore the most time-consuming research and development. The advantage is it is the most cost-efficient system in mass production, and this is also its advantage over the HHO hydrogen systems. Self-running magnet motors driven completely by zero-point energy will need approximately a similar production price as classical electric motors of comparable power and performance. So they are optimum for large-scale production. Furthermore, the system can be scaled up without any principal limit. Based on the computer simulation available, which I have performed up to now, I estimate the range of application with a minimum power somewhere between 5 and 10 kilowatts. It is not necessary to operate the device permanently at full power, but it is necessary to take a few kilowatts as long as the device is switched on. The advantage is that larger devices are easily possible. Downsizing the engine below 5 kW is almost impossible, but upsizing becomes easier and easier the bigger the devices are. The smallest economically sensible units are therefore the ideal and inexpensive utilities for households, where the electricity price is then based only on the manufacturing costs of the machine and will be well below 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour. This means few hundredths of a cent per kilowatt hour. Upsizing the machine to the multi-megawatt range is not very complicated and results in an optimal supply even for large industrial consumers. Scaling has no upper limits in terms of size. Due to the extremely high speed of the rotation, however, vibrations occur which must be damped with a suitable housing. Because of the high speed rotation, the application can only be possible stationary, not mobile. Due to the very high robustness and long-term durability of the system, I imagine that individual houses could be equipped with such devices, as well as every single industrial factory, so that the cross-country transport of electrical energy is completely redundant. The consequence is that high-voltage power transmission lines overland can be left away completely. A typical unit for the energy supply of a household of 5 to 10 kilowatt will need a housing with base area of about 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters or 2 by 2 meters and a height of about 1 meter. This fits easily into every house cellar. For larger devices, the power performance does not increase linearly with the housing dimension, but fortunately more than proportionally with the housing dimension, so that powerful devices, even in a multi-megawatt range, can be set up relatively easy. As almost mentioned, the decentralized energy supply makes power transmission lines completely superfluous. This has a particularly beneficial effect in the regions of our planet where high-voltage roads have not yet been built. For example, in the poorer regions of Africa and Asia, it will become apparent if each house is taken care of individually or if the houses are grouped together in smaller groups, either neighborhoods or villages or larger homes for several families, but that can be thought through and realized following the preferences of the people, even individually as they like it best. In the industrialized countries, there is the additional advantage that should not be underestimated, that we no longer have to fear an electrical power blackout. When I use the term of industrialized countries, I'm thinking, of course, that the hitherto poor countries will build up their own industry, finally thanks to the use of zero-point energy. Incidentally, the story of the electrical power outage is a risk that should not be underestimated, as the Swiss Federal Office for Civil Protection, BABS Schweizer Bundesamt für Bevölkerungsschutz, has elaborated in a study which can also be found on the internet. Just for fun, here are a few critical questions. How do people get out of the subways in the tunnel? How can airplanes land when the airport runs out of electricity? How does water supply work? How are emergency services available? Clinics have emergency generators. In a video demo in the internet we read, due to the fact that prisons no longer have security electronics, there are now more and more criminals on the way. I cannot even imagine what else can happen. But some people talk about that after a few days of electrical power outage, civil war-like conditions prevail. So, now I have exemplarily presented 4 systems of zero-point energy converters, which together can cover the entire energy needs of humanity. Of course, I do not want to forget to point out that there are many more systems that are being discussed on the internet, in literature, and in the zero-point energy community. Their consideration is also worthwhile because they create further new opportunities for each market niche and for everybody to always develop the optimal system for each type of application. Such systems can additionally accelerate the whole zero-point energy utilization project, because we can expect that the universities will deal with this topic as soon as the first basic zero-point energies are widespread all over the countries and continents. When the zero-point energy engines will be everywhere in the world. These devices are no longer deniable, so that the colleagues at the universities will slowly begin to develop the enormous and gigantic courage to confess without asking for a non-disclosure agreement that they already have read publications in the internet about zero-point energy technology. Opportunities and risks of the zero-point energy project. Since people are urgently asking for zero-point energy devices, no sales problems will be expected. The main risk is hardly in the danger of technical failure, because we already see lots of functioning equipment, but the main risk is more a non-technical one, namely especially in the sociological problems. From peace-wiki suppression, which I have just shown a few minutes before, we know numerous case studies of inventors who had already completely solved the technical problems, and yet because of sociological obstacles they could not distribute their devices in large numbers. This means they have been made unable to distribute their devices to the humanity. So there will still be a non-technical task to be solved in order to make the way free for the zero-point energy devices to be brought to everybody in the world. There is a lot to be done, let's do it, was the advertising of an energy company a few years ago, which has now become a winged word. This reminds me that I would like to come to the last chapter of this slide lecture by telling something beyond pure energy supply. There is much to be done, not only to bring the technical energy supply on the planet Earth into a good condition. The use of zero-point energy can also solve some other problems of mankind. The first example of such problem is the drinking water problem. Some parts of the world are so extremely dry that life is hardly possible, or only under the most difficult conditions. In the desert, there is so little water that people can survive only with great difficulty. Thus, I demand not only free energy for all people, but also free water for all people. In our European latitudes, the air carries so much water that it is sometimes too much water for the air to carry all of it in the evaporated aggregate state. In these cases, the water condenses from alone and just falls down. This is what we call rain. We all know that, unlike the inhabitants of the desert. They often do not know that. There is so little water in the desert that it almost never rains. Accordingly, plants can hardly survive there, and virtually no humans. Let's take a look at the driest desert on the earth, the Atacama in Chile. We almost never see vegetation there. Just every 5 to 10 years it rains, and only then we can see a colorful sea of flowers. Most of the years pass without plants and without water. People cannot grow food there, such as we are used to in our farms. Our convenient lifestyle is simply impossible in these regions due to a lack of water, in the Atacama Desert as well as in the Sahara. This is a problem, although these deserts always contain plenty of water in the air. Most of the time, there are only about 10 to 15 milliliters of water vapor per cubic meter in the air in the Atacama, and in the Sahara, the average is about 17 milliliters of water vapor per cubic meter in the air. Far too little, as the water would condense by alone. This is the reason why there is almost no rain in the desert and why the nature is extremely dry there. But plenty of water vapor is just flowing with the wind. For an example, just consider a very moderate wind with a speed of 20 kilometers per hour. This is not much. Then we have 200 to 300 liters of water in vapor form, which will pass through every square meter of a cross-sectional area perpendicular to the wind within one single day. If we assemble an open barn door of only 3 by 10 meters, in such wind in the driest desert, we get 144,000 to 260,000 liters of water per day going through this barn door. So, where is there any water shortage? There is no lack of water. There is only the problem that the water passes by and nobody can convert it into the liquid aggregate state and collect it. In the Sahara, the conditions are very similar as in the Atacama. The Sahara has a bit more water than the Atacama, but the figures I have presented here for the Atacama are only slightly better than in the Sahara. That means there is enough water, much more than we need. It would be enough if we just hold on the existing water in the Atacama as well as in the Sahara, just as well in all other deserts of this earth. To get the existing water in liquid aggregate state, we have to condense it from the air. Therefore, we only need a so-called condenser. This is nothing more than a cooled surface on which the water vapor precipitates until finally drops form, which run down in a collecting container. Everybody knows this principle of condensing water on the glass surface of cold windows in the winter, for example, on car windows. For homes, we normally use double glass for energy savings, so we do not see this effect. But condensed water dryers work exactly the same way. A metal surface is cooled and the water collects in a collecting container. By the way, the military nowadays uses the condensing principle to supply soldiers in the desert with water. 1 liter of diesel fuel contains 20 kilowatt hours of energy. Condensing 1 liter of water requires 0.28 kilowatt hours of energy. 20 divided by 0.28 gives 71.4, which means they only need to carry 1 liter of diesel in order to get approximately 70 liters of water. Due to simple logistical reasons, the military generates water directly in the desert from the air, that is, through condensation. As soon as energy will be for free, without any costs, and as soon as energy consumption does not pollute our environment any further, we can condense unlimited amounts of water from the air. This will be the case under the use of zero-point energy. The people will not only have an amount of energy for free, but they also will have any amount of free water. So the water is just as cheap as the energy. It does not cost anything. Condensers to easily get the water from the air can easily be bought nowadays, just simply via internet. The only missing part is the energy to power these devices. People will be glad if they can grow up green plants everywhere in their native home country in the deserts. We can see this in the case of Majid Abdelaziz, for example, who inspires many people with his wonderful desert greening project. As soon as we can provide the energy for free from the quantum vacuum, all the deserts of this earth and all the Sahara in the entire surface will bloom. Then the entire country becomes a fertile land. Together with the problem of drinking water, at the same time another problem is being solved: the world hunger problem. According to the United Nations World Food Programme, around 870 million of people worldwide are suffering from hunger. That's 12% of the total world's population. Malnutrition contributes to the deaths of 2.9 million of children under 5 years every year. This is more than 45% of all child deaths worldwide. Please imagine that. Almost every second child who dies in preschool age dies not because of illness, but only because of hunger. This is hard to believe, and this is definitely not what we want. We want healthy children and healthy adults, healthy animals and healthy plants. All living beings shall be healthy, and the whole planet. This is exactly what we can achieve with the use of zero-point energy from the quantum vacuum. What can we achieve with biofuel? We take away the food from the poorest. This is crazy and really unfair. It should not be true, but it is. Thus I decided to say something about the efficiency of biofuel. Therefore I quote Professor Dr. Hartmut Michel, director at the Max Planck Institute for Biophysics in Frankfurt am Main, Germany, who published an article in a scientific journal entitled "About the Nonsense of Biofuels." It was the Journal of Applied Chemistry, and this article contains also the following words. It is easy to figure out which percentage of solar energy is stored in biofuels. For German biodiesel, which is made from rape seeds, this is less than 0.1%. For bioethanol, it is less than 0.2%. Some scientists even doubt that using bioethanol saves energy at all. And further he wrote, biofuel with a net efficiency of 0.1%. So far I quoted the colleague Hartmut Michel, and now I say my opinion. Such a poor efficiency I have never seen before. If we take away the food from the poorest, starving people for such lousy efficiency, then we recognize all the more the shamefulness of our actions. And so to say it completely, Professor Hartmut Michel is not just somebody, but he is Nobel Prize laureate. This makes me believe his statements. Also, a part of the consequences of my vision of life is we must use the zero-point energy as soon as possible and immediately stop to take away the food away from the hungry among us. We must give the poorest the energy extremely cheap. The energy will be extremely cheap for all of us, and then must be available to the poorest. Then the hungry can grow enough food. All of this will be necessary for humanitarian reasons, for spiritual reasons, but also for those who are greedy, namely in order to prevent wars, because wars destroy values, also the values of the rich people. No more energy wars, that's right and beautiful, but I want no more wars at all. People who are well fed and satisfied do not go to war. There are a few more components of my vision of zero-point use, but I do not know how far and in what time frame we can realize it. Certainly, they are not the first thing on the agenda, but on long-term run, this is, over a course of several human generations, we will have to implement them because we have so badly maltreated our home planet, our Mother Earth, that we have to treat it to a cure. This includes the restoration of a life-friendly Earth atmosphere that we are about to destroy. If we do nothing there, we will run out of breath in the long run. I speak about the oxygen in our atmosphere. The background is the following. In theory, we could filtrate carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere and split it up into carbon and oxygen. We have the zero-point energy, therefore, from the quantum vacuum. This would reduce the carbon dioxide percentage of the Earth's atmosphere, and we could return the pure oxygen to the Earth's atmosphere, compress the carbon into briquettes, and burrow it under the ground. But this is not the main critical aspect, because for the sake of honesty we have to confess that in the last 10 years the global warming is stagnating. In the meantime, even the very famous German popular journal of Spiegel admits researchers are puzzling about the standstill of global warming. In fact, this Spiegel report refers to a NASA publication found here at the link which you can see now on the screen. In addition, various other NASA publications, finding of the Russian Academy of Sciences and other top institutes, write that planetary warming in our solar system is not limited to Earth alone, but that our planets in our solar system and even their moons are affected, and that such warming or cooling effects typically recur every tens of thousands of years. Even the polar ice caps on the Mars are currently melting. Therefore, while we think about the carbon dioxide, we should always keep in mind that on the one hand the carbon dioxide content of our Earth's atmosphere is not mainly made by mankind, but dominantly natural, especially found in our entire solar system, not only on the Earth, and on the other hand, global warming has not progressed in the recent years. This does not relieve us from the obligation to take care of the carbon dioxide content in the air. and not to increase it unnecessarily for technical reasons made by human hands. But it also reminds us that we should not dramatize the situation too much, as it is the case in many reports today. However, what is quite serious is a completely different problem, not the carbon dioxide content in the air, but the oxygen content in our breathing air, which is very closely connected to the carbon dioxide content in the oceans. All habitants on our planet are interlinked with each other, also those in the ocean and those on the land beyond the sea. By that we actually get into bigger problems in a finite time frame. The oceans are losing their breath can be read again and again in many journals. Just to entitle some of them: the Focus, the Stern, the Bavarian Radio, but also reports of the ETH Zurich, which is a top university in Europe. We find pictures of deceased creatures and dead fish. This is not really encouraging and inspiring. However, we realize the enormous explosiveness of this message only when we make clear to ourselves how closely we land creatures are connected to the underwater life in the oceans. As soon as one of them die out, the others do the same. That is a law of nature. That is why I emphasize again and again that we have to respect, to take into consideration, and to care about all living beings. An interesting source gives us an interesting context. You can see the link on the screen, and I quote from the source: "Without the oceans, all other ecosystems would be doomed to die, because the oceans connect all ecosystems across all continents, as carbon storage, as huge heat reservoir, as a buffer in the continental temperature gradient." At the same time, they not only produced almost 75% of the world's oxygen on our planet, but they also secure our drinking water, and they also regulate the climate. In this species' richest and largest habitat of our planet, a colorful variety of flora and fauna thrives. More than half of the world's population lives in the 595,814 kilometer coastal areas of the oceans. People are harvesting the fruits of the sea. They have only been explored to 1%. Many are seeking recreation or tourism here. We must understand the importance of this information in the context of the fact that the number of marine life has declined by 80% in the recent 20 years. So to say that at the moment only 1/5 of the sea inhabitants are still alive, compared with the amount of creatures which there have been approximately 20 years ago. The primeval forests do not carry the dominant part of world oxygen production, but only the dominant part of the oxygen production of the land creatures. 75% of the world oxygen production comes from the oceans, that is, from plankton, from algae, and from all kinds of small unicellular organisms living in the ocean. And we have already lost or destroyed 80% of this dominant part, those 75% of the world's oxygen production. This is already reached today. 75% of 80%, this is 60%, not far away from 2/3. Almost 2/3 of the world's oxygen production has already died. But not irrevocable. Animals and small creatures multiply. We will run out of air, and we will suffocate if we do not save the world's oxygen production, if we do give the seas any help. If we do repair our own mistakes, we can rescue the world's oxygen production. The tiny bubbles of oxygen produced down there in the depths of the oceans take several years to rise to the surface of the water. This is why we need some time to measure the lack of oxygen in our atmosphere. On their way up, those tiny oxygen bubbles serve many fish as breathing air. With their gills, the fish collect these small oxygen bubbles from the water. This is vital for the fish, because they breathe exactly this way. Until we notice the lack of oxygen on the surface, a few more years pass. That is the only reason why we have not heard any alarm up to now. But it is only a question of few years until we land creatures remember the problem and follow the fish into breathlessness. And this is not a gimmick I'm talking about here. Life in the oceans and land creatures are linked together to life and death. The progress towards death has advanced far beyond what most people are aware of. One such death zone is the Bay of Bengal, the sea between India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand and Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean. There is a larger oxygen-free region at a depth from 100 meters up to 400 meters, making animal life impossible. It is a region of tens of thousands of square miles of sea that preceded us on our way to death only by a few years. The situation does not look better in the Gulf of Mexico. Even the famous journal of Spiegel reports a gigantic death zone. We see this off the coast of Louisiana and at the mouth of the Mississippi River. The reasons for this can also be found, like so much, on the internet. Under the link now displayed you can read: the Gulf of Mexico is currently creating a gigantic death zone for fish caused by the US meat industry. When I see with what brutality mankind abuses animals in the meat industry, then all I can do is to cry and to look away because my little soul just cannot stand it. But those who watch the movie Hope for All and endure it will know what I'm talking about. We cannot expect that we may disregard the dignity of animals and living beings without any restrictions. Such behavior will come back to us. Whatever we do will come back to us. We know the dignity of humans and we say the dignity of humans is inviolable. But how about the dignity of animals? Is there even any dignity of animals? By the way, we should also not forget the dignity of plants. That is why I demand urgently that everywhere in the world, all human beings, all animals, all plants and all living beings must be respected well, and that we must take care of them, even those who are supposed to be the weakest, whom we do not yet have paid any attention. You can see how the air runs out, not only in the already known death zones in the sea. We will miserably suffocate as humanity if we continue as before, and the weakest living beings are only a few steps ahead of us. But what are the people doing? They write political questions on their agenda, such as the question of the appearance of a banana. In order to be suitable for European Union citizens, it must be at least 5.5 inches long and 1.06 inches in diameter and additionally fulfill some other conditions. Do we not have anything more important in mind? No, we don't. Immanuel Velikovsky described this problem very brilliant in his book Mankind in Amnesia. Immanuel Velikovsky is not just somebody. Immanuel Velikovsky is co-founder of the University of Jerusalem. When he was offered the office of university president, he decided to reject it on the reasons that he would like better to research subject-related content because that would be better suited for his interests than the pure administrative work of a university president. Consequently, he moved to Princeton University, working not far away from Albert Einstein. There he published astrophysical results, which can still be read in his book Worlds in Collision. His results had been so revolutionary and spectacular that he was finally declared persona non grata, and thus he was expelled from the campus, so he was forbidden physically to enter the campus area. Since his results, which include, among other things, the gas composition of the Venus atmosphere, are now all, this means completely all of them, verified by the modern measurements of astrophysics, his fate is now in the retrospective described as a major science scandal. Fact is, however, that Velikovsky gave his book Worlds in Collision to a publishing house for publishing, and the publisher accepted it for publication. But then all of the other scientific authors at this publisher insisted on removing the Velikovsky book from the publishing program. Otherwise, it was the unanimous threat of the scientific colleagues. All other authors would withdraw all their publications, so that sooner or later the publisher would go bankrupt. So hard was the bullying against Immanuel Velikovsky, and it was successful. The science publisher did indeed remove the book Worlds in Collision from his program. But Velikovsky then looked for another publisher, found one who was not dependent on the science colleagues, and Velikovsky could actually publish his book there. This book still exists and can be bought today in many bookshops, including the attached link. Incidentally, this book has become the second most sold book of all time in the category non-fiction. Number 1 is the Bible. Nobody will reach the size of its edition. And Velikovsky's World in Collision is also a book that Albert Einstein read at last. When his inheritors came to his desk after his death, they found this very book open on Einstein's desk with Einstein's pencil comments on the paper of the book. The scientists around the world who find really new insights, as shown here in the example of Immanuel Velikovsky, are treated in a very special way by the mainstream of colleagues, especially by those who are most ambitious but do not have the creativity to get the world fame which they want to have. This is a well-known phenomenon, absolutely not new. If you want to understand more about this, you can also look into the book Forbidden Sciences, Suppressed Research by Richard Milton. Above all, you should recognize the importance of Immanuel Velikovsky and the scope of his work. On this background, please understand also the meaning of the importance of his book Mankind in Amnesia. For example, in this book, Immanuel Velikovsky describes the example of someone hearing in the radio about a particular heavy hurricane approaching to the region where his house is standing. How does the person react? Who expects a cyclone which will produce a zone of complete clear cutting in a width of approximately 50 or 60 miles. He hears the radio warning. He also understands the location information in the radio show immediately, because he lives in the middle of the track of the expected devastation. He also continues to hear that he has 8 hours left to leave the track. He further hears the radio message which strongly recommends that all residents in this path of the hurricane should leave their region. He knows he has only to travel 25 miles to get out of the dangerous region. It would be no problem with his car, because he had 8 hours of time. But he needs only a comfortable half hour to drive, to avoid any danger for his life. Under his circumstances, I would say, no hecticness. Let us pack our important things, certificates, passports, banknotes, and then drive away comfortably by car for 50 miles, so that we have a certain safety distance to the hurricane, so that nothing can happen to us. The typical average person reacts totally different, the opposite way around. He goes into his garden for lawn mowing, and when he is ready, he just sits down on the garden bench and waits. He enjoys the nice looking clean garden, and he is happy about his work done. His neighbors, who have also heard the radio alarm, go to the supermarket and buy food for emergencies. They hoard oatmeal. Only very few people are, as Immanuel Velikovsky said, really on their way to escape the danger. And that's exactly what we humans are doing at the moment now. We see the danger, we are in amnesia, we do not act meaningful and leave our fate to the serene amusement. Not moving at all is the tactic of a guinea pig seeing the snake who wants to eat it. Amusement is the tactic of the mayflies. They can survive only if they reproduce extremely numerous. That reminds me of Albert Einstein's phrase which he shaped. Two things are infinite: the size of the universe and the stupidity of human beings. But I'm not really sure with regard to the size of the universe. So if we want to do it better than the mayflies, then we will have to work concretely to preserve our Earth. And for this purpose, the use of zero-point energy is one of the very few critical key technologies. But this can only be possible and successful if we become active. But I do not want to leave the topics of carbon dioxide percentage in the air and climate problems and ocean rescue completely. The question immediately arises, how can we save ourselves from those problems? What can we do? Can we still save ourselves? And now we come to the consideration which gives the carbon dioxide perhaps some meaning, and the carbon dioxide savings just become relevant. The reason is the chemical reaction you are seeing on the screen now. Water combines with carbon dioxide to form carbonic acid. This results in a massive acidification of the entire oceans of our world. According to a study published by the British Royal Society, which assumes a pre-industrial pH of the near-surface seawater of an average of 8.25, the pH should have been reduced to its present value of 8.41 on average. This means by 0.11 units. The dissolution of various corals is now well known as a consequence of the acidified seawater. They are simply decomposed by the water with the wrong pH value. A model from the USA that not only detects the already existing destruction but calculates an extrapolation into the future in the sense of a prognosis, expect a reduction of the pH within a few decades of years of more than the sixfold of the amount which is already measured in total over the last decades. The result of this study confronts us with an expected decrease in the surface pH of 0.7 units in direct correlation of the pH value of the seawater with the carbon dioxide content in the Earth's atmosphere. Of course, we want to give honor the truth and respect the fact that the carbon dioxide produced by humans is not the dominant reason for the climate shift in the Earth's atmosphere. Nevertheless, we cannot deny that the carbon dioxide causes the problems of the acidification of the oceans, and the negative consequences are to be expected in foreseeable future. This is within a few decades. In doing so, we address a period that does not span a whole human life. The younger among the audience will still become aware of this because you will witness this directly. The cleansing of the oceans, which is an urgent task incidentally, not only affects the filtering of carbon dioxide, but we must also collect plenty of other dirt and remove it from the oceans. Thousands and thousands of rotting nuclear waste barrels from the seabed, even in the North Sea, but also from elsewhere in the oceans, are to be removed. Megatons of rotten plastic garbage, some of which is eaten by fish, but also by marine mammals like whales, kill these animals and thus will have to be removed from the oceans. Whales starve to death with completely full stomach because they cannot digest the plastic in the stomach, but there is no space left for digestible food. In meantime, even the World Wildlife Fund writes it quite openly. No sea can swallow all this dirt. Our oceans sink into plastic garbage. We also read in the article about 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, but today hundreds of thousands of pieces of plastic waste are floating in every square kilometer of the ocean. Seabirds torture painful at mobile phone parts in their stomachs. Tortoises regard plastic bags for jellyfish, and fish mistake tiny plastic particles as plankton. According to an estimate by the marine conservation organization Oceana, 675 tons of garbage are dumped directly into the sea every hour, half of which is made of plastic. So, now I've described the amount of garbage with the word megatons. Then please regard this as a very special dimension, so that the material is collected by nature due to the ocean currents, even two gigantic lumps sticking together. That is why there is talk of plastic islands. If we do not go to the cleaning work within a few decades, then we do not have to deal with this task anymore at all, because everything will be too late anyway. This problem can also be solved with zero-point energy, because we can launch computer-controlled ships driven with our new clean energy doing these jobs of cleansing the ocean without producing the emissions of diesel engines. The plastic which the ships will collect from the sea and bring ashore can be decomposed back into its chemical constituents with the help of clean energy, and thus can be processed back to new plastic. In this way, even for the plastic being already carelessly thrown into the sea, a cradle-to-cradle cycle can be installed, which is a return of old used material into new raw material. Finally, we do not need to exploit new natural resources to maintain our previous consumer behavior. For a quite long time I wondered and asked myself if it would be economically possible to cleanse the oceans, because for a long time I did not see any economic source of income there. In the short term and the medium term of time schedule this will indeed be the case, but in the longer term the plastic scrap removed from the sea will provide sufficient raw material for the entire plastic industry. But if we use diesel engines to power the ships which clean the sea, we emit more carbon into the Earth's atmosphere than we can extract from the sea with the plastic. Then the economical balance will be even worse than a zero-sum game. In order to rescue our global Earth atmosphere, we need a business with positive economic results. Such a business model will function exactly at the moment when the energy costs go down to almost zero, as it is the case with the use of zero-point energy. Then the economic business model will be the same good as the environmental balance. Oh, what will life be nice as soon as everybody on Earth will use the zero-point energy. All spectators are now invited to pass on the link of this video to friends and their friends and so on. Retelling and forwarding is just as free as the zero-point energy itself. If there are many people who want to have the zero-point energy, then this issue can no longer remain concealed, and then the zero-point energy will come. It is only a question of information. People do not know about the zero-point energy, and this is the reason why they cannot speak about it up to now. So, what can you individually do to accelerate the benefits of the zero-point energy? The benefits for the environment and the benefits for yourself? Quite simply, tell and tell and tell the story. Free energy is possible. It requires just a bit of activity from everybody of us. And it is really not too much activity required if you send the link of this video here to friends. Perhaps, if possible, with some additional information about the zero-point energy of the quantum vacuum. Many thanks for attention, and see you soon in a more beautiful world. Let us help together to rescue this world here.